Welcome to Early Research Stories, the podcast that brings you inspiring stories from diverse voices in the world of learning and instruction. Join us as we dive into the latest trends, research breakthroughs, and insights shaping the field today. Hosted by Chris Castro, Rachel Shanks, and Leonie Johan, this is your inside look at the heart of educational research.
Hi, and welcome. My name is Leonie Johan. We are here with Kari Smith, who is the Professor Emerita from NTNU, the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, to discuss her research and life decisions. To become a researcher, she was an active early member involved in SIG 1 assessment and evaluation, and 13, the teaching and teacher education, and especially interested in PhD supervision, teachers' professional development, new teachers and assessment with a focus on pedagogical aspects of it. Kari, thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm very happy that the experience of an elderly professor might be of interest to young researchers. So thank you.
Hi, Kari. I'm Chris Castro. I wonder if you could start telling us a bit about your academic path, which we know has, for large parts, included Norway and Israel. How did you end up being where you are now?
Okay. I majored in economics in high school, and in August already enrolled at the University of Economy at that time in Norway. And at that time, there were about 400 boys or men and 4 girls. So after a few months, I decided, no, Kari, this is not for you. And I told my parents, I'm going to Israel to solve the Middle East conflict. As you know, I haven't been very successful. So I came to a kibbutz. It was very popular at that time to go as a volunteer to work on a kibbutz. You met people from all over the world, and for Norwegian, it was fascinating. But as often happens, then I met my first husband and married, had my first child. After a few years, the kibbutz told me, we need an English teacher. Okay, I'm going to the university or to the college to study English. So I did my BA in English language and literature and the teaching of English as a foreign language, and started teaching in school on the kibbutz. And I would go as far as to say that the nearly 20, I think it was 18 years I taught in school has formed me as an educator and as a researcher later on, because most of the questions I have researched and looked at, they come from my own experiences in the classroom. And then I wanted to study self-assessment, because I felt that as a teacher, it was unfair that I was the only one, besides the final exam, who could decide on the student's grade. So I think I was one of the first who really did a PhD on self-assessment. In the meantime, I had 3 other boys, so I had 4 boys altogether. I did my BA at Haifa University, Master in Tel Aviv, and PhD at Bar Ilan. So because I thought that the inbreeding of academics is not always healthy, because you will follow what your supervisors have done or said. And I wanted to meet new people, new theories. So I decided to do it in 3 different universities. So then I went to Norway and started to commune between Norway and Israel. And I went because my mother got terminally ill. And I was already a professor in Israel, so I got a professor position at University of Bergen as well. There I worked for 10 years, enjoyed it tremendously, got to know, become familiar with Norwegian context. Remember, I left when I was 18 and became the head of the steering committee for teacher education at University of Bergen. But then in 2010, and I discussed it with other deans, and that was that we needed a research school in teacher education in Norway. So NAFOL was founded. So when that project ended, it was prolonged with 7 years. So I decided to retire.
That's a very, very long and interesting story.
Yeah.
What would be like something that researchers from Israel should learn from Norway way of doing research and vice versa?
I think the first thing is that the government in Israel has to give more funding to educational research. They give funding to other types of research, but not enough to educational research. But I think the educational researchers that are here in Israel, they are pretty good. In Norway, now it is better, but when I came, Norwegian educational researchers, they were too local. They had little idea of what happened abroad. So one of the aim that we also had in NAFOL was to push people to become international.
Okay, I just wanted to know also like a bit comparing Israel and Norway with regard to, would you say, Kari, that there is a difference in kind of, how to say, the status of being a teacher in Norway compared to Israel?
No, I think it is a low enough, a too low status in both countries these days, unfortunately.
I'm Rachel Shanks. Thank you for the comprehensive account of your career. I wondered, during that time, were there any particular people that stood out as mentors that helped as you went through those different parts of your career?
Yeah, thank you for that question, because I never had an appointed mentor beside when I did my practice teaching in school. But none of these mentors who were teachers in school made such a big impression on me. So I think that people that I would call mentors, that have, without knowing that they've done it, mentored me, are people from each degree. The teacher who taught me English teaching methodology at the college, her view on what learning is, her view on how to focus on the learner, that has followed me later on in my own teaching, not only teaching in school, but also later on when I worked with my students and PhD students, etc. Her name was Mrs. Pnina Linda. She was an American, and she's still alive, I think, in her late 90s. The second one, and that is a professor I call my academic mother. She's from Tel Aviv University, Professor Elite Olstein. When I did my master there, she asked me, or she offered me, job as her research assistant. That really taught me quite a lot about research, how good research should be done. Also the fact that she was the head of the program. She taught me that even at the master level, you have to see each student as an individual. So some of them need more help during their master studies. Others need less help, but we are here to give them the help they need. And then the last one, that is Professor Bernard Spolsky. He was my supervisor for my PhD. He is well-known researcher, and he's a great linguist. But with him it was very interesting because he was in psychometrics and psychometric language testing. And I did my PhD on self-assessment. And he said, I don't agree with self-assessment. And I will never publish anything with you because I don't agree. But that, he said, is not my responsibility. My responsibility is to make sure that your work is up to the required academic standard for a PhD. And that he did. And you have the right and the duty, he said, to investigate questions you ask, not what I ask. He really taught me that it's not the supervisor's PhD, it's the student's PhD. And my responsibility as a supervisor is to make sure that the student flourishes in his or her way.
Yeah, I find this very intriguing to listen to this. Your thoughts about, being like a PhD, or I was a PhD student not too long ago, as you know, Kari, because I was a part of NAFOL, like the National Research School of Teacher Education in Norway. And we were like also really lucky to have mentors. We all felt it was a central concept of NAFOL, actually having these mentors who kind of had the role of coordinating groups of PhD students. My question is like, if you could tell us a bit more about the philosophy of these mentors. Was that kind of a conscious idea about having these mentors from the get-go, or was it something that was just introduced a bit later? And where did this idea come from?
This idea came from my own experience as a school teacher. We accepted a student in cohorts, like classes. So you couldn't enroll in NAFOL throughout the year. And
Yes.
then I thought that each cohort should have somebody who is like their homeroom teacher, somebody they can turn to. I was their steering committee, so I was there all the time, and I tried not to be far away, but I couldn't be close to when we had up to 200-300 students in the school. I couldn't be that close to each of them. That was the mentor that we had, officially the coordinator for each cohort, Professor Annelena Östen and I, who planned NAFOL or made a program. We thought that we have to educate the whole human being. If you just focus on the techniques of doing research, we forget that there is a person doing this kind of research. And this person has a history. This person has dreams, has family, has sorrows, has happiness. This person needs support. This person needs cultural experiences, social experiences, all together with becoming a good and excellent researcher. So that is what we tried to do. And Leonid, she can, when you don't talk to me anymore, she can witness if it's true or not, if you succeeded. But that is what we tried to do in the yearly seminars that we had in NAFOL. Each cohort had 4 yearly seminars of 2 to 3 days. And 2 of these seminars, they were abroad. So we went abroad in order to meet with PhD students from other universities to make networks. And also we were well funded. So we could invite the best people in the world to NAFOL. I hope that we have made an imprint. At least the final report, external, is very, very favorable in terms of NAFOL.
That's true, Kari, on the university. At least in my university, there are some efforts, sometimes in minor steps, but they're definitely evolving. And working further with NAFOL's ideas,
Yeah, for me, it was quite an experience. I must say that it was like a dream. To be able to work with NAFOL like that, it was like a dream.
Moving a little bit to another topic, how has this association early shaped your career?
It has been very important to me. Let me tell you very briefly about my first early conference. I hadn't finished my PhD. I came to this psychometric, at that time, mainly psychometric organization, and I came with action research on teachers' self-assessment in the classroom. Early action research at that time, self-assessment. I felt that when I started talking, there were northern winds blowing into the room. But it went well, and already at that, the first conference, I made quite a lot of friendship, acquaintances, and the network started. Assessment, as I said, was my main interest first in early, and therefore I became active there. But I came with a focus on assessment for learning, assessment as learning. It seems that in a way that was accepted because at least I was asked to be the coordinator. And I enjoyed that very much, worked alongside people who are respected and who became friends and became colleagues. So it has really broadened my international networks. But then my research interest also expanded. And I use the word expand, Chris, and not change. And I'll tell you why. Because I became interested in teachers and teacher educators' professional development. And to me, that is extension, expanding assessment, because professional development, you have to have feedback in order to develop. You have to be capable of self-assessing yourself in order to develop, etc. So it was natural when I started teaching more general education at the university, and not only within English and assessment. This became a field of interest. And then it was natural that I became interested in SIG 13. But I must say that early has opened doors. And it has given me opportunities to go all over the world as well, together with ARA and ESA, but certainly early was the beginning.
Thanks.
and shown how you've been actively shaping and observing educational research over the last few decades. And I just wondered, in terms of what research trends you think that you've noticed or that you see developing in the future?
I think that trends developing in light of tensions that we have. And again, of course, these will be tensions related to my own field, my own work that I know most of. Summative formative assessment, assessment of learning, assessment for learning. The tension is still as strong as it's been for the last 2 decades, 3 decades. And the reason is that I see the advantages in both. There has to be some control of what is learned in school and so on and so on, whereas, which is a psychometric, whereas the assessment for learning or as learning is not that. Researchers, politicians don't agree, and we are still looking at this in order to find a good answer. And I think those who are most stressed by it are the teachers who have to practice it in the classroom. Another thing is institutional agency in teacher education, and even teacher educators agency, and even teachers agency if you want to go down to that. But I'll focus on institutional agency. That is also in Norway. Education and teacher education, as Merlin Cochrane Smith says, it is policy steered. The politicians, they want teacher education to educate teachers to teach the way they want to see school. But these politicians, they change. And we know that agency, that means that you have a bit of freedom to do what you want to do and what you think is best, even at the institutional level. That very often contradicts the centrally steered teacher education in those countries where you have it. So also here, there's no agreement between how much steering shall we have and how much autonomy should we see, how much agency should we see. That is also a question that is unanswered. And then the last one, that is, of course, my latest baby. And that is research on PhD education. Because until a decade approximately, a bit more, most research on PhD education was done on the programs. Now we are more interested in the experiences of students and of supervisors.
I think on that note, do you maybe have like any distinction or a publication which you consider especially influential and which you would like to share with our audience?
I hope that my most recent papers on doctoral education, that they are influential. But the one which is noticed, which is most influential, is from 2007. It is published in Tate. The story is that Dr. Harm Tillema from Leiden University and I met him in early. We worked quite a lot together, specifically on portfolio for professional development, portfolio for teachers. We did a study where we looked at how these portfolios were used. And then we found that the more summative the purposes became, the more tick off the portfolio became, that ticked off the criteria. So it wasn't, that means the purpose of the portfolio was was lost in a way. So we wrote a rather critical article at that time where everybody was in favor of portfolio, submitted it, got back again with 2 reviews. One review said, accept as is, first time and ever time, I think, in my life. The second reviewer criticized nearly every word in the article. Then we got it back from the editor, major revises, please revise the article according to the reviews. And then Harm and I, we looked at each other and we said, how are we going to do this? And we sent it back again, as is. And we said, this is a decision you as chief editor have to make. It was published, as is, and it became the most read article that year in Tate. So interesting. But what do I mean here is that research shall break through norms, cross barriers, and so on. So don't be afraid to do that. That means don't always be yes people in research, even though it's easier to be accepted very often when you are like that. No, cross barriers when you need to.
Since you are now mentioning that we have to be brave in research, I'm guessing you also were brave in your life. You had 4 children. You have to educate 4 children while moving around institutions. So how did you achieve this work-life balance?
I worked hard and discipline, quite a lot of discipline, and fantastic support from my partner. My 4 boys call themselves, the first one says he's the bachelor, the BA victim, and then you have the master victim, the PhD victim, and the professor victim. And when we laugh at that, when we all meet at Christmas and so on, with their families, these things always come up. And then I say, gosh, have I been such an awful mother to all of you? And then I say, no, Mom, you taught us 2 things, important things. One is when you have a goal, never to give up. And the second is that you really taught us how to work a microwave, how to make our own sandwiches and work a microwave oven. So I was never the mother who cooked, but they were well fed and always time to talk. When I worked, for example, I stopped working as the dean of the department at 2:00 and then closed the office, all doors to the office and the telephone, and then worked, for example, on my PhD till I finished. So it was quite a lot of discipline, self-discipline. But that is also good now being an Emerita. Now I do only what I want to do, like talking to you.
On that note, Kari, it's been very exciting and it has been a pleasure to talk to you and to listen to your academic and life path. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope you find this episode worthwhile listening.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate talking to you.
Listeners, make sure to subscribe, follow us on social media, and stay tuned for the exciting episodes we have coming your way. See you next time on the Early Research Stories podcast.